Hey, 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 and welcome to the Grit and Wit podcast, where we chat about what it looks like to live out Christianity and how we can have fun and enjoy life in the process. I'm your host, Rebecca Caldwell. Welcome to the party. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. It's Becca, and I actually have a super special guest with me here today. It worked out that we were here at the same time, and so the long-awaited debut of my husband being on the podcast. So Trey is my husband. We've been married for coming up on 11 years. On the 27th of September, that will be our anniversary of 11 years. So that's basically also how long we've been together, because we didn't date long before we got married. So
yeah, it didn't take her long to figure out she wanted to marry me.
Oh gosh, he had to convince me first. He was a little bit of a stalker back when MySpace was a thing. So, so yeah, Trey, how do you feel about being on the podcast?
I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Feeling pretty good. He's not like a super excitable person, so I feel like he's pretty hype right now, even though it may not appear that way.
I'm on level 9.
Level 9. What would make it a 10?
Race cars.
Okay. Well, I mean, we can talk a little bit about race cars. Race cars, that is his passion. That is his jam. So, maybe if we were recording it in a race car, that
would be pretty fun.
That would be cool. Okay. So one day, who knows, we might do a podcast in a race car.
That would be cool.
Okay. As we go forward today, Trey has actually been talking about the subject of perspective a little bit. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is perspective and how that affects and shifts how we think and how we live and that kind of thing. So we actually pulled up the definition. I'm going to let him share that.
Okay, perspective is a particular attitude toward or a way of regarding something, a point of view, or true understanding of the relative importance of things, a sense of proportion.
Break that down for us.
So when you talk about perspective, it's the ability to put things in their proper place, for one. That's one kind of understanding of it, and we'll talk about that a bit more here in a minute. And it's also being able to put yourself in a situation where you can think outside of what you can see directly. Whether that comes into, this becomes very important when you're talking about your relationships with other people, how you see your boss or your coworkers, or those types of situations where you think you see a situation for the way it is from your point of view, but you have to realize that, on the other side of that, in somebody else's situation, they're looking at maybe a different set of circumstances from what you can see, and being able to properly put yourself in place to analyze a situation based on that.
Because a lot of us go in with just the point of view of, this is where I'm coming from, and so our perspective can be a little skewed because we're not taking in all of the context, essentially.
Correct. Especially we see that to be true with, at our job, right? Because us or myself as a employee, we're looking at a situation and we're going, well, this is what my manager should do, or this is what my boss should do. But really, we may not necessarily have all the facts, and they may not have all the facts too. And it's not saying that their perspective is necessarily correct, but we have to understand that they're maybe looking at a different set of situations than we are. It's kind of like, we're probably most guilty of it if you're a sports fan, right? You would say, well, Drew Brees should have done this. He should have passed to this, to Michael Thomas. He's wide open, or whatever the case may be. But we have a different perspective than what Drew Brees has on the field, right? We have a different perspective. We're looking at it from above. We're looking at the whole playing field, whereas the quarterback on the field can only see a certain amount of things, right? His perspective is different. So it's easy for us to play the role of quote-unquote armchair quarterback.
Yep.
And, yeah, we made the right call. That's what he should have done, but we can't see the field the way that he does.
It kind of, and that makes me think sometimes how we when we get in a situation where, like, I don't understand what God's doing, and it's because he gets the whole view of the field. Like, we're only in our position, and so our perspective can kind of be skewed, but we kind of go with, I don't understand what's happening right now, but it's because we don't have that big picture, right? We're on the field, and God sees the big whole picture. He sees the whole field. He sees every player. So anyway, side note for that.
The artist tends to see the whole picture before it's painted. You know, I think about, like, when Shelby painted some stuff, and I'm looking at it. I'm not an artsy person. Like, I don't understand art very well at all, but I'm watching her paint, and she's doing simple, small brush strokes and stuff, and I'm like, I don't get where this is going, you know. And so it's kind of the same way. She's got a vision in her head of what that's going to look like, and it's the same way with us for God. We're only seeing a small part of the work that he's doing, and so it's hard for us to understand where that's going because we don't have the vision, and we don't have the perspective, the proper perspective to see the whole thing.
And I asked Trey before we got started if he could kind of connect that to fear, because we've been talking about fear the past couple of weeks, and it does have a lot to do with perspective. So how would you connect that? Changing our perspective, how could that help us in overcoming fear?
Well, having an understanding of what the things that you fear can actually accomplish. Because for one, like we discussed earlier, before we started recording, but the things that we fear in life most often never come true. So being able to put those things in their proper proportion as to how they relate to our thinking every day. You know, most of us, or I would say most of us, live our lives a lot based on fear. Like fear of loss or hope for gain is kind of one of those things that we make a lot of decisions. We hope for a gain or we fear a loss. So we make a lot of decisions based on those two things. But what we have to remember that is rarely do those fears come true. You know, most of the things that we fear the most rarely ever happen. But what we do is we make them the biggest part of our decision making. You know, they're taking up 75% of our decision making when they have a 5% chance of actually happening.
And so just really kind of stepping back and taking everything into account, really shifting our perspective and making sure that we're paying attention to the right things instead of hyper focusing on the negative things.
Correct. And you know, for me personally, I'm a pretty fact-driven type of person, so I'm looking at, you know, in anything, what are the odds that this is going to be a thing? Like, what are the odds that this is going to happen? So if the odds are low, then I try not to worry about it. If the real chance of it happening is very low, then I'm not going to spend any real time on it.
So you're more fact based, you know.
Correct.
But he's an Enneagram 5, friends. And so
Yes.
There's that. If you are into the Enneagram, he's a 5, so he's more in the head space and kind of thinks things out. So, but I will say, I think sometimes even in your fact based logistical kind of thinking, there is still that fear of what if that kind of hangs out sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not a preparer in the same way that you are. More of a prepare for worst case scenario kind of thing. So I guess that thinking does take place because, you know, as you guys in the audience have gotten to know Rebecca a little bit, you know that she's a little probably more of a risk taker and likes to jump off in the deep end. And I'm not that person, right? So, like, I'm thinking about what's the outcome, what could go wrong. I do think in that way a lot of times, and I have to really focus on that. I was thinking about this when you were talking about fear. I was thinking about even when I go hunting, right? In the daylight, being in the woods is not an intimidating thing for me at all, right? But for some reason, when the sun goes down, I'm in the same set of woods, but automatically the situation becomes a little more sketchy in my mind, you know, so I have to combat that. But like, these are the same set of woods, these are the same places I was in when the sun was up. It's just dark now. I'm using a flashlight. So it's that type of perspective change, right? Just being daylight to dark in that situation totally changes the way my mind works in that situation. I have to combat that.
Yeah. So if you were trying to get somebody to shift their perspective, to change their perspective, how do we do that? How do we maybe widen our scope of perception, or change it if we recognize, okay, the way I see things, the way I'm thinking is not good? How do we change that?
I think for me, usually relationally, it's a situation of trying to slow my mind down a little bit and not think worst case. So, like when somebody says something to you or they do something that you don't agree with, the first thing you have to remember is try not to take anything personally, because it's rare that decisions are made by other people that's a personal attack against you. And that's a piece of perspective that I'm actually going to talk about Wednesday night, is that your own pride sort of comes into play, and you assume that the stuff that people are doing is directed towards you when really it's not. So the first thing that I try to do is slow down, realize that it's probably not personal, and then try to gain some information, right? Try to gather some info. Like, let's look at the whole playing field, the whole scope of the situation, and let's see if I was gathering more info, because I'm information driven. So if I can gather some more info, maybe I can understand why this decision was made, or why this choice was made.
Right. And so, and it reminds me, I had a situation this past weekend where dealing with some people who just kind of seem to be difficult all of the time, and really just, and a lot of people are saying, well, what did I do? Why did I make her mad? And it just kind of, I guess God really kind of impressed it upon my heart, and he said, it's not that they're mad at people, it's just that they're mad. Like, they've had some things happen, and they've had some personal things that have happened, and they're expressing that towards other people, but it's not the other people that are the issue, right? The issue is really like what's happening inside their heart. And so where we're going, well, what have I done? It's more about what are they going through? What are they experiencing? What is happening with them? Because a lot of times it's not anything that the other person has done. It's what's happening on the inside. I mean, you think about, a lot of times when I'm in a bad mood, other people feel it, and they're going, okay, well, what's happening? What's going on? Or are you mad at me? Is usually the first question. Are you mad at me? And it's like, no, it's me. I'm the issue. I'm not mad at you. You didn't do anything. I have a problem. I think that especially in relationships, as far as really taking things into perspective, is a lot of times when people lash out or something's going on with them, we take it on as like something that we've done, or we try to take responsibility.
Right. So, like, if somebody they're bitter, or they're having, anger issues because of some situation that's going on in their life, that shifts their perspective, right? They're viewing everything through that lens, right? So it's changing the way that they're seeing the world based on what's going on in their heart or in their mind. And that's a thing that we have to do when we're trying to shift our own perspective, is realize why they're acting that way, why their attitude is the way it is, or whatever. And it really can vastly improve your relationships with other people if you'll just take some time to not take it personal. You can't count on other people to change their perspective necessarily, but you can be accountable to yourself to shift yours a little bit so that you can gain some understanding. Right.
I've said this from time to time, is that you can't change other people's actions, but you're responsible for your reaction.
Correct.
You're responsible for how you respond in whatever circumstance it might be in. And that does take some self-control. And if you missed the Fruit of the Spirit podcast, you can go check that podcast out. But we talked about self-control being a fruit of the Spirit, something that we have to grow. It's something that we have to learn, and we have to allow God to also cultivate in us. And I think too, remembering also that we deal with people, and we ourselves deal with our fleshly outbursts. We ourselves deal with hurt or disappointment or whatever it might be. And I think being careful and mindful of that. Like if other people are mean or they're hateful or whatever it might be, it's usually because they're dealing with something. There was a particular person that I was dealing with on a regular basis a couple of years ago, and they were just really mean, just all the time in a bad mood and just mean about nothing. And then we found out that she was actually sick, and very, very ill, and it made me understand, okay, that's why. She's not mad or being mean intentionally. It's just that she's probably upset with her circumstance. Like, she's sick and she doesn't feel good. And y'all know, if you don't feel good, you usually don't act good. And so it's taking all of that into consideration. And even with, I mean, if you're a Christian and you look at people who maybe don't know Jesus and they don't know the hope of Christ and they don't know the love of the Lord, they're going to have an even more difficult time with being nice and being kind and that kind of thing. And so keeping that in perspective too, and knowing that maybe if you can react in love and in kindness even when they're not, you might be able to shift their perspective. You might be able to shift how they're acting and how they live. And so keeping that in mind too is that as you shift your perspective and change the way you think about what's happening, then that also, I think, can relate to other people.
Well, yeah, because you can usually offer, in a situation like that, if you have the proper perspective, you have the proper outlook on the situation that you're in, you're not taking things personally, you can offer a kind word. Right, and the Bible tells us that a kind word turns away wrath. So, and sometimes it's even small things. I was thinking about, like even in the shop where I work, the heat changes the attitude of the people in the shop. So sometimes it can be something very minor, like that sort of raises that threshold a little bit, or actually would shorten the threshold a little bit for what people will tolerate. Just being out in 100-degree weather can make people a little more snappy, change their attitude a little bit because it's uncomfortable.
Right. And so you see that in relationships and our perspective as far as all of that goes, and even taking the opportunity to pray for people, right? And pray for yourself. Hello, don't neglect that. Pray for yourself to respond well, and then also pray for other people. You don't know what they're facing. You don't know what they're going through, and even let's just break this down and bring it up. And it's those people, if you hit up a drive-through and those people who are rude and whatever it might be, I feel like that's where a lot of people struggle, is in the drive-through or at a whatever store you might be in. If somebody, whoever is checking you out and their job is customer service and they're having a rough day, sometimes it's hard to hide that. And so can we be those customers that don't respond back at them with the same kind of attitude, but to come at them from a different angle and just, hey, I hope your day gets better, whatever it might be.
Right.
And so just taking those opportunities to pray for people and to be kind and to shift our perspective in our relationships, because I guess that's kind of where we went and focused on today was relationships and perspective.
And we have a tendency to, it's an old cliche, but you miss the forest for the trees. And so with people, it's a lot the same way. We miss the beauty of what community can be because we're dealing with individuals. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of retract from that, or at least that's what I tend to do, is I tend to back away from those things. I back away from relationships when I don't like the way that people are acting, or sometimes I just don't want to deal with it. So I tend to back up. And that's probably one of my, and maybe even one of my fear things, right, is I just don't want to deal with, I don't want to have to be that uncomfortable.
Right.
Because working out these relationships or trying to gain new perspective is uncomfortable, because you have to quit leaning on the way that you normally think or the way that you would normally react. You quit being reactionary and you start having to be proactive in your thinking, and that's uncomfortable. And so you tend to fear those things. Like, you fear what you don't know, and you're in uncharted territory mentally, and that can be a really scary place to be.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up the serious talk right there, and maybe Trey will come back and join us again, and we can kind of talk about perspective some more on another episode. Who knows? Maybe he'll even come back next week. We'll see.
You never can tell.
You never can tell. So just for fun, because I love having, I don't know, it's more fun when people are here with you when you're recording a podcast, in case you're wondering about it. So I'm just going to say, okay, some of my favorite things about you, and then you can tell me some favorite things about me.
Okay.
Because that's just fun to me. Okay, so some of my favorite things about Trey, he is funny. He's kind of undercover funny a little bit. I try not to tell him too often, but here it is, live. He's pretty witty. He's pretty quick with his wit, and I love that he is very smart, and he does love to race cars, and he is forever working on something.
It's a perpetual project all the time.
Cars, guns, and hunting, which I'm not mad about his gun obsession, because if you know me, I love guns. I don't know that much about them, but I just want to shoot them. So there's that. All right. Which one? You don't have to list that many, but just what do you like? What do you like about me? Why are you happy you married me?
Well, you are super funny, for one. To me, anyhow. I don't know how well you do with other people always, but you're super funny to me, and I like that you kind of go to bat for your people. Like for those of you that are listening that know Rebecca well. You know that if you're one of her people, then you're one of her people. And she will go to war for you. And that means spiritually, physically, whatever the case may be. If there's a fight, she's in it for you. And I like that about her. And she'll help you dream a little bit. Like I'm not a good dreamer. I don't think necessarily outside of what I can see right in front of me. So she helps me gain some perspective, right? See the bigger picture of the things that she's got more faith than me, so she can see things with a little more God's eye view than I can most times. So
yeah, well, I will say, he says that I'm funny, but he also sees me at my weirdest. So I think sometimes he's just like, "You're so weird, it's comical." Also, I'll say when people say I'm funny, then I feel pressure to be more funny, and I think that makes me less funny.
Well, you're not a stand-up comedian, so you don't have to come up with jokes after that.
Well, we're excited that you're on the podcast today. I know my fellas that listen are probably happy to hear a guy on here.
Well, I hope so, and hopefully I don't sound too country on here, like I just fell off a turnip truck.
Well, there's that. So, friends, if you enjoyed today's podcast, make sure you go leave a rating and review over on iTunes. We are grateful for any kind words that you want to leave us. It helps other people find the podcast. And also, if you can hear that patting, that's Trey patting our dog. I'm like trying to eliminate noise, and he's over here just making all the noise. Anyway, hopefully it doesn't pick it up.
It may not.
It may not. And if you want to become a financial partner with the podcast, if you want to become a VIP insider, you can head on over to patreon.com/gritandwit. That's patreon.com/gritandwit, and join us over there. We would be grateful. If you have any health and wellness needs in your life, I also do a little bit of coaching. There's going to be an at-home workout program coming your way soon. So for all of that information, you can head over to the Battleground with Rebecca Caldwell on Facebook, and you can follow along with me on my personal journey on Instagram at Becca D. Caldwell. And as always, I'll talk to you next week, friends. See you then.